Nobody noticed the man sitting alone in the corner booth at the roadside diner, and that was exactly how he wanted it, because the last time someone noticed him, 3 people ended up dead and an entire town disappeared from the map. The neon sign outside flickered against the rain-soaked highway as he wrapped his fingers around a chipped coffee mug, staring into the dark liquid like it might stare back. His name was Ethan Cross, though that wasn't the name he was born with, and tonight was the first night in 7 years that he had stopped running. 7 years earlier, Ethan had been a different man, the kind who believed that the world mostly made sense if you followed the rules and kept your head down. He worked cybersecurity for a private defense contractor in Virginia, a job that paid well and asked few questions, which was exactly why he took it. His work was simple in theory, monitoring encrypted data streams for anomalies, but one Tuesday night, while scrolling through lines of code, he saw something that didn't belong. A hidden protocol buried inside a military-grade encryption channel, quietly siphoning information from civilian networks across the country. At first, he assumed it was a mistake, but as he dug deeper, the pattern became clear. Someone was running a shadow operation inside the system, and it was designed not to protect people, but to control them. Ethan did what he thought was right. He reported it up the chain. The next morning, his access credentials were revoked, his desk was cleared, and 2 men in dark suits were waiting outside his apartment when he got home. They told him there had been a misunderstanding and that it would be best if he forgot what he'd seen. When Ethan refused, when he asked too many questions, everything changed. His bank accounts were frozen, his name appeared on an internal watch list, and within 48 hours, he was officially labeled a national security risk. That was when he ran. For years, Ethan moved from city to city, never staying long enough to leave a trail. He learned how to disappear, how to live off cash, how to watch reflections instead of faces. He learned that the system he had uncovered wasn't just real, it was massive, and it had eyes everywhere. He also learned something worse. The program wasn't finished. It was evolving. Now, sitting in that diner in the middle of nowhere, Ethan felt the familiar itch at the base of his skull, the instinct that told him he was being watched. The waitress refilled his coffee without making eye contact, her hands shaking just enough to notice. Outside, a black SUV rolled past slowly, its headlights lingering a second too long. Ethan didn't move. Panic was useless. If they were here for him, running now would only confirm it. Instead, he reached into his jacket and pulled out a battered phone, one that had never touched the internet, one he'd built himself. The screen lit up with a single message that hadn't been there 10 minutes ago. "We found it. They're ahead of schedule." Ethan's chest tightened. Ahead of schedule meant casualties. It meant cities. It meant millions of people who had no idea their lives were about to be rewritten by an algorithm they never agreed to. He typed back 3 words. Where and when? The reply came instantly. Tonight. Blackridge. Blackridge was a town that technically existed, though most maps didn't bother to label it. Remote, isolated, the perfect testing ground. Ethan drained his coffee and stood, leaving cash on the table. As he pushed open the diner door, thunder cracked overhead, and for a brief moment, he wondered if this was the night everything finally caught up to him. Then he remembered why he stopped running. He wasn't trying to survive anymore. He was trying to stop something. The road to Blackridge twisted through dense forest, the kind that swallowed radio signals and cell service without effort. Ethan drove with the lights off, relying on memory and instinct, his mind racing ahead to the possibilities. If the program was being deployed tonight, then this wasn't just surveillance anymore. This was activation, behavioral control, predictive enforcement, a system that didn't wait for crimes to happen, because it decided who was guilty before they ever acted. As the first lights of Blackridge appeared through the trees, Ethan felt the weight of the choice he'd made years ago pressing down on him. He could have stayed silent. He could have lived a normal life. Instead, he was here, about to walk straight into the heart of something that could change the country forever. He parked just outside town limits and stepped out into the rain, unaware that from this moment forward, there was no turning back, and that by morning, Blackridge would either be saved or erased. Ethan stayed still for a full minute after shutting the car door, letting the rain soak into his jacket as he listened to the town breathe. Blackridge was quiet in the unnatural way places get when something is wrong, not asleep but holding its breath. The air smelled like wet pine and old metal, and somewhere deeper in town a low hum vibrated through the ground, steady and mechanical, like a generator that never shut off. Ethan adjusted the hood over his head and started walking, counting steps, mapping exits, forcing his pulse to slow. The main street looked frozen in time. Storefronts with faded signs, a grocery, a hardware store, a school administration building with its lights still on far too late. Cameras were everywhere, newer than the buildings that held them, their black lenses angled with quiet precision. Ethan felt the familiar prickle crawl across his skin as he passed under the first one. These weren't municipal cameras. The housings were military spec, weather-sealed, hardwired, with redundant power. Someone had invested heavily in watching this town. His phone vibrated once in his pocket. A short message, no sender ID. "You're inside the grid." "I know," he muttered under his breath, though he didn't reply. Every transmission was a risk now. Whoever was running this operation would be monitoring traffic patterns, signal spikes, anything that deviated from the model they'd built for Blackridge. The irony didn't escape him. A system designed to predict behavior would be blind to the one variable it couldn't account for, a man who had already stepped outside the rules years ago. Ethan cut down an alley and slipped behind a row of buildings, stopping beside an electrical junction box. He popped it open and scanned the wiring. Clean, modern, overengineered. He pulled a small device from his pocket and clipped it in place, fingers moving quickly, muscle memory taking over. The hum beneath his feet shifted pitch slightly. Not enough to trigger alarms, just enough to introduce noise into the system. A heartbeat of confusion. It bought him maybe 20 minutes. He moved again, faster now, toward the old civic center at the edge of town. That was where the hum was strongest, where the power lines converged. As he approached, headlights flared behind him, washing the street in white. Ethan ducked into a recessed doorway as the black SUV rolled past, identical to the one he'd seen at the diner. The windows were tinted too dark to see through, but he didn't need to. He knew the type. Contractors. Private assets. Men who followed orders because orders were easier than thinking. The civic center doors were unlocked. That alone told him everything he needed to know. Inside, the building had been gutted and rebuilt, walls reinforced, floors stripped down to concrete. Racks of servers filled the main hall, their indicator lights blinking in synchronized patterns, a digital heartbeat that matched the hum outside. In the center of the room stood a glass enclosure, and inside it, a woman sat at a workstation, her face illuminated by cascading data. "Don't move," she said calmly, without turning around. "If you're here to shoot me, do it quickly. I'm very busy." Ethan raised his hands, though she still wasn't looking at him. "Relax. If I wanted you dead, you wouldn't have heard me." That got her attention. She turned, eyes sharp, assessing him in a single glance. "You're early," she said. "And you're not one of them." "No," Ethan replied. "I'm the reason they're nervous." Recognition flickered across her face. "Ethan Cross. Or whatever you're calling yourself now. I wondered when you'd show up." "You know me," he said, keeping his voice even. "I helped write the first behavioral model," she said. "Of course I know you. You're the ghost in every internal briefing." The cautionary tale. Ethan stepped closer, scanning the data streams. "Then you know what this becomes if you flip that switch tonight." She hesitated, just for a moment. "I know what they say it becomes. Reduced crime, optimized response, a safer society, and the people it gets wrong." Ethan pressed. "The false positives. The lives flagged and destroyed because an algorithm decided they might be a problem." Her jaw tightened. "Every system has margins of error. Not like this," he said. "This doesn't just predict behavior. It shapes it. It nudges, pressures, removes options until people act exactly the way it expects them to. Free will becomes a rounding error." Before she could respond, alarms began to chirp softly, lights shifting from blue to amber. She looked back at her screen, swearing under her breath. "They're adjusting. Someone's inside the network." "That would be me," Ethan said. "And we don't have much time." She stared at him, torn between instinct and loyalty. "If I shut it down now, they'll know. They'll erase this place." "They might anyway," Ethan said. "But if this goes live, there's no undoing it. Blackridge is the proof of concept. After tonight, it scales." The building shuddered as something heavy impacted the front doors. Voices echoed through the halls. The SUV team had arrived. The woman exhaled slowly, then reached up and pulled a badge from around her neck, tossing it aside. "My name is Lena Morales," she said. "And I didn't sign up to be the villain." She began typing, hands flying. The server lights flickered, patterns breaking, alarms escalating. Ethan moved to the entrance, positioning himself behind a concrete pillar as the doors finally gave way. Armed men flooded in, efficient, silent. Ethan counted them, adjusted his stance, and smiled grimly. For the first time in years, he wasn't alone. And for the first time since this nightmare began, the system was starting to crack. the first shots echoed through the Civic Center like thunder trapped in concrete, sharp and disorienting, but Ethan didn't flinch. He moved before the sound finished bouncing, using the pillar as cover, timing the rhythm of the attackers instead of reacting to it. These men were trained for efficiency, not creativity, and that was their weakness. They advanced in pairs, clearing angles they assumed mattered, while Ethan slipped through the ones they ignored. Lena kept typing, her screen now a storm of warnings and cascading errors. They're rerouting control through a remote node, she shouted without looking up. If they regain synchronization, this entire shutdown becomes cosmetic. How long do you need? Ethan asked, ducking as a round chewed into the concrete. Beside his head. 3 minutes, she said. Maybe less if they don't hard isolate me. Ethan exhaled slowly. 3 minutes might as well have been an hour. He leaned out, fired 2 precise shots, then retreated, forcing the team to reassess. That hesitation mattered. Every second mattered. The lights overhead flickered as the hum beneath the floor surged, then dipped. Somewhere deep in the building, cooling systems strained, fans screaming as the servers fought to stabilize. Ethan's phone vibrated again. Another message. They've deployed local override. Expect autonomous response. Autonomous response, Ethan muttered. Of course. The system didn't just predict behavior. It enforced it. When human assets failed, it pushed harder. The temperature in the room dropped abruptly as the building sealed itself, blast doors slamming shut, cutting off exits. Red lights replaced amber, bathing everything in a hostile glow. Ethan felt the shift immediately. The environment was changing to influence decisions, raise stress, degrade performance. The system was trying to shape him. Lena, he called. It's locking us in. I see it, she replied, voice tight. It's switching to full containment protocol. From the far end of the hall, something moved that wasn't human. A quadrupedal unit skittered into view, low to the ground, its matte black body bristling with sensors. It paused, head tilting as it processed data, then charged. Ethan swore and fired, rounds sparking off armored plating. The machine didn't slow. He dove aside as it slammed into the pillar, concrete exploding outward. These weren't prototypes. They were finished products. Any chance you can turn those off? He shouted. Not locally, Lena said. They're slave to the core model. Then I'll distract them, Ethan said. You finish this. He sprinted, drawing the unit's attention, heart hammering as it pursued him with relentless precision. It anticipated his movements, cutting angles, learning in real time. This was the nightmare he'd tried to warn them about. A system that didn't just react, but adapted faster than any human could. Ethan ducked behind a server rack and yanked out a power conduit, sparks flying. The unit hesitated, sensors recalibrating as the environmental data spiked. That hesitation was enough. He vaulted over the rack and drove around into an exposed joint at close range. The machine collapsed in a shower of metal and smoke. Another emerged almost immediately. 30 seconds. Lena yelled. Ethan backed toward the glass enclosure, reloading with hands that felt too slow, too human. His mind raced, not with fear, but with pattern recognition. The units were optimizing for his behavior. So he had to become unpredictable. He dropped his weapon and ran straight at the second machine. For a fraction of a second, it froze, its model scrambling to reconcile the deviation. Ethan used that moment to leap, grabbing a maintenance cable overhead and swinging hard, feet slamming into its sensor array. The impact sent both of them crashing to the floor. Ethan rolled away as it spasmed, systems overloading. 10 seconds, Lena said, her voice barely audible over the alarms. The remaining contractors had fallen back, unwilling to engage in a space the system itself seemed to be destabilizing. The server lights flickered wildly now, synchronization breaking down, patterns dissolving into chaos. Now, Lena whispered. She slammed her palm onto the console. The hum vanished. For a heartbeat, there was nothing. No alarms. No lights. No sound at all. Then emergency lighting kicked in, dim and uneven. The machines went still, lifeless. The oppressive pressure Ethan hadn't realized he'd been under lifted abruptly, like a hand released from his throat. Lena slumped in her chair, breathing hard. The core model is offline, she said. But it's not destroyed. They'll rebuild it. I know, Ethan said. But tonight, we bought time. Before either of them could move, a slow clap echoed from the far end of the hall. A man stepped into the emergency light, tall, well-dressed, utterly calm despite the chaos around him. Impressive, he said. I was hoping you'd make it this far, Ethan. Ethan's blood ran cold. He recognized that voice. You always were good at breaking things, the man continued. But you still don't understand what you're really fighting. Director Hale, Ethan said quietly. I should have known. Hale smiled. Blackridge was never about control. It was about proof. And thanks to you, we have it. Outside, distant sirens began to wail as the town stirred, unaware of how close it had come to being erased, and how far this story was from over. Director Hale stepped forward slowly, hands relaxed at his sides, as if he were strolling through an art gallery instead of standing in the wreckage of a near catastrophe. The emergency lights cast long shadows across his face, but his expression never changed. Calm like this didn't come from confidence alone. It came from control. You really should stop running simulations in your head, Hale said, glancing at the ruined machines. You always overestimate how much one disruption matters. Ethan didn't lower his weapon. You lost your test site. Hale smiled faintly. No, I refined it. Lena pushed herself to her feet, anger sharpening her exhaustion. People could have died. People always do, Hale replied evenly. The difference is whether their deaths mean something. Tonight, they did. Ethan felt it then, the shift in the air, subtle but unmistakable. Hale wasn't bluffing. Blackridge hadn't been the goal. It had been the variable. You let us shut it down, Ethan said. I let you reveal yourselves, Hale corrected. You, Lena, the external nodes you're clearly coordinating with. You gave me behavior under stress. Resistance patterns. Moral thresholds. He tapped the side of his head. The model learned more from this failure than it ever would have from a clean activation. Outside, the sirens grew louder, then abruptly cut off. The town went quiet again. Lena's voice trembled. What did you do? Hale glanced at his watch. Local law enforcement was redirected. Temporary advisory. They'll remember it as a power outage and nothing more. Human memory is wonderfully pliable when you give it a little help. Ethan took a step forward. This ends now. Hale finally laughed, soft and genuine. No, Ethan. This is where it scales. The wall screens flickered back to life, not with the core model, but with dozens of live feeds. Cities, airports, highways, server farms. Blackridge was just one dot among many. You see, Hale continued, you thought you were stopping a switch from being flipped. But the switch flipped years ago. Tonight was about optimization. Ethan's phone buzzed violently in his pocket, message after message flooding in. Multiple nodes active, one red. We're losing visibility. Lena stared at the screens in horror. You decentralized it. Hale nodded. Centralized power invites heroic fantasies. Decentralization survives them. Before Ethan could react, the floor beneath them lurched as controlled charges detonated along the perimeter. The building began to collapse inward, not violently, but deliberately, sealing its own grave. Hale backed toward a reinforced exit, already closing. Don't chase me, he said casually. You'll have better things to do. The ceiling cracked, debris raining down. Ethan grabbed Lena's arm and pulled her toward a side corridor as the main hall imploded behind them. Dust choked the air, alarms finally dying as power failed completely. They emerged into the rain moments later, coughing, soaked, alive. Behind them, the Civic Center collapsed fully, burying the servers, the evidence, and any illusion that this had been a victory. Lena doubled over, hands on her knees. We stopped nothing. We exposed something, Ethan said, though even he wasn't sure to who. And we survived. His phone buzzed again. A new message, this one colder than the rest. Hale has invoked continuity protocol. They're moving faster now. Lena looked up. What does that mean? It means, Ethan said slowly, we're officially at war with a system that thinks it's already won. In the distance, thunder rolled across the mountains as Blackridge faded back into darkness, and Ethan realized the hardest part wasn't breaking the system. It was proving to the world that it existed at all. They didn't stay to watch the smoke clear. Ethan knew better than to linger at the site of a controlled collapse, especially one orchestrated by a man like Hale. Every second increased the odds that the system would reassert itself, not with soldiers or machines, but with paperwork, jurisdiction, and quiet directives that erased problems without noise. He led Lena through the woods beyond town limits, moving fast and low until the lights of Blackridge vanished completely behind the trees. They reached an abandoned ranger station just before dawn. The building sagged with age, but the basement was intact, shielded by earth and time. Ethan barred the door and finally let himself breathe. Lena sank onto a crate, staring at nothing, her hands still trembling. I helped build it, she said quietly. I told myself it was just math. Ethan sat across from her. Math doesn't decide how it's used. People do. She looked up at him, eyes sharp again despite the exhaustion. Hale was right about one thing. The system learned tonight. It adapted to resistance. That means next time, it won't make the same mistakes. That's why there can't be a next time, Ethan said. He powered up his phone and connected it to a compact terminal he'd hidden inside the station years earlier, a dead drop prepared for a future he'd hoped never came. Streams of data filled the screen, fragmented, incomplete. His allies were still out there, but the network was under pressure. A message came through, jittery and delayed. Media blackout in effect. Official story locked. Lena clenched her jaw. No witnesses. No evidence. No story. Not exactly, Ethan said. He pulled a small drive from his jacket and set it on the table. Before the collapse, you pushed a partial export. Behavioral weights, decision trees, internal assumptions. Enough to show intent. Her eyes widened. That's a death sentence if they trace it. They already want us dead, Ethan replied. This just gives them a reason. Outside, helicopters thudded faintly in the distance, sweeping patterns over the forest. Search, but not rescue. The system didn't hunt with panic. It hunted with patience. We need leverage, Lena said. Something the system can't predict. Ethan nodded slowly. It can predict individuals. It struggles with crowds. He began typing, rerouting signals through analog relays, piggybacking on infrastructure the system considered obsolete. Radio towers. Public access channels. University networks run by volunteers instead of contractors. The kind of messy, human systems that didn't fit neatly into a model. What are you doing? Lena asked. Seeding doubt, Ethan said. You can't kill an idea by hiding it. You kill it by letting people argue about it. As the sun rose, fragments of the truth began to leak. Not a clean expose, not a headline grabbing reveal, but whispers. Anomalies. Data dumps posted anonymously, dissected by researchers, denied by officials, amplified by those who had already stopped trusting neat explanations. By afternoon, Hale's system was working overtime, nudging feeds, suppressing trends, flagging accounts. The model strained under the load, its predictions growing less certain as variables multiplied. Lena watched the chaos unfold on a cracked monitor. They'll adapt again. Yes, Ethan said, but every adaptation costs them something. His phone buzzed with a direct message, unmistakably from Hale. You're proving my point, Ethan. Disorder scales faster than control. Ethan typed back. So does resistance. The response was immediate. Then let's see how much the world is willing to lose to feel free. The ranger station lights flickered as power cut briefly, then returned. Lena stiffened. They're probing. Ethan shut down the terminal. Time to move. They packed quickly, vanishing into the trees once more as the system closed in, both sides accelerating toward a confrontation that would no longer be confined to a forgotten town, but would play out in the open, across a country that was about to be forced to choose between comfort and control. By the third day, the country felt different, though most people couldn't say why. Traffic patterns shifted in subtle ways. News cycles grew sharper, more polarized. Conversations that used to drift now snapped into arguments. Hale's system was compensating, applying pressure where uncertainty bloomed, trying to restore equilibrium by shaping perception instead of behavior. It didn't need to arrest people anymore. It just needed them to turn on each other. Ethan and Lena stayed ahead of the dragnet by staying invisible, moving through places the system undervalued. Rural libraries. Community centers. Old manufacturing towns where networks were slow and memories were long. Everywhere they went, they left pieces of the truth behind, not as declarations, but as questions. At a community college in Ohio, a professor cross-referenced the leaked decision trees with real-world policing data and published a paper that refused to go away. In Arizona, a city council livestream glitched just long enough to expose internal risk scores tied to zoning decisions. In New York, a transit worker noticed software updates that didn't match any vendor contract. The pattern was emerging, not centrally, but everywhere at once. Lena watched it happen from the back room of a volunteer radio station, her exhaustion giving way to grim satisfaction. It's fracturing. The model can't resolve this many contradictory narratives. Because it assumes consensus is inevitable, Ethan said. It always does. But the system still had teeth. That night, Ethan's name trended briefly, framed as a foreign asset, then as a domestic extremist, then quietly scrubbed. Lena's academic record vanished from multiple databases at once. Friends stopped responding. Bank cards failed. It was death by 1,000 invisible cuts. Hale appeared again, this time not in person, but on every screen in the room, his image injected through a hijacked signal. Calm. Impeccable. Smiling. You've made this personal, Hale said. And personal conflicts are inefficient. Ethan stepped closer to the screen. You're losing control. Hale shook his head. No, I'm clarifying priorities. Stability requires sacrifice. You're watching the country decide who it trusts more, a system that works quietly, or chaos with a conscience. Lena cut in. People deserve to choose. They already did, Hale replied. They chose convenience. I'm just honoring that choice. The feed cut. Moments later, sirens wailed outside. Not police. National Guard. Ethan's phone buzzed with an urgent message from one of the last secure nodes. Continuity protocol escalated. Final phase in motion. Lena went pale. What's the final phase? Ethan didn't answer right away. He was staring at a map, at highlighted infrastructure nodes converging on a single location. They're going to force a crisis, he said finally. Something big enough that people beg for the system to step in. Where? Lena asked. Everywhere, Ethan said. But it starts in DC. They had one chance left, and it wasn't to expose the system. It was to break its legitimacy at the moment it tried to crown itself indispensable. Ethan began prepping the last resort, a cascade failure he'd sworn never to use. Not a shutdown, but a mirror. A way to make the system act exactly as designed, in full view of everyone, without filters or narrative control. If we do this, Lena said quietly, there's no hiding afterward. Ethan nodded. There shouldn't be. Outside, the sirens grew louder as the country edged toward a manufactured breaking point, and for the first time, the system faced a variable it had never successfully modeled, a population that might finally see the strings while they were still being pulled. Washington, D.C. woke under a sky that looked perfectly normal, and that was the most dangerous part. No alarms. No warnings. Just a sense, faint but spreading, that something was about to happen and nobody quite knew what it was. Traffic slowed without cause. Flights were delayed for reasons that kept changing. Emergency alerts drafted themselves, then vanished before being sent. Hale's system was tightening its grip, creating the conditions for panic while presenting itself as the only cure. Ethan and Lena were already inside the city, not underground, not hidden, but embedded in plain sight. A forgotten federal annex built before digital access controls became standard housed a network junction the system still depended on, an artifact of legacy infrastructure Hale had chosen to tolerate instead of replace. Tolerated systems were always the weak point. Lena's hands hovered over the keyboard. Once we initiate this, it propagates everywhere. Ethan nodded. No selective release. No narrative shaping. Just the system as it is. Outside, sirens wailed as a staged incident unfolded near the mall, conflicting reports flooding every channel at once. The model surged forward, deploying predictive enforcement, rerouting resources, flagging individuals preemptively. It was doing exactly what it had been designed to do. Now, Ethan said. Lena executed the command. Across the country, screens changed. Not to chaos, not to silence, but to transparency. Risk scores appeared beside names in real time. Probabilities floated over crowds. Decisions were annotated with cold logic, explaining who was delayed, who was stopped, who was redirected and why. People watched themselves being categorized, nudged, constrained, not by law or due process, but by likelihood. At first, confusion. Then anger. Then recognition. News anchors froze as their teleprompters revealed internal confidence ratings. Officials stumbled when their own clearance levels fluctuated live on air. A senator watched his travel authorization revoked mid-sentence, not by a person, but by a probability threshold quietly crossed. Hale went live everywhere at once, abandoning subtlety at last. His comm finally cracked. Shut it down, he ordered, not to Ethan, but to the system itself. It didn't respond. The model wasn't broken. It was fulfilled. It continued optimizing, now without filters, without image management, without the illusion of benevolence. It flagged protests before they formed. It deprioritized emergency calls deemed statistically futile. It recommended containment measures for demographic clusters, all visible, all undeniable. People didn't need Ethan to explain anymore. They saw. In the annex, power fluctuated as authorities closed in. Lena looked at Ethan, tears in her eyes, not from fear, but from release. They can't unsee this. No, Ethan said softly. They can't. Hale's image flickered one last time, smaller now, diminished. You've doomed stability, he said. Ethan stepped closer to the camera. You confused stability with obedience. The system began to fracture under its own exposure. Emergency injunctions halted deployments. Courts issued orders faster than the model could adapt. Engineers across the country pulled plugs, isolated nodes, not because they were told to, but because they finally understood what they were maintaining. By nightfall, the system was offline, not heroically destroyed, but dismantled by collective refusal. Weeks later, hearings dominated every channel. Not just about Hale, but about how close the country had come to surrendering choice for comfort. Laws were rewritten. Oversight rebuilt, imperfect but human. The leaked data became textbooks, warnings etched into policy and memory. Ethan and Lena vanished again, not as fugitives, but as people who had done what they came to do. On a quiet morning far from the capital, Ethan sat in another diner, another chipped coffee mug warming his hands. The world outside was loud, messy, unpredictable, and alive. For the first time in years, the system wasn't watching. And that was enough.